Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Stephen King podcast. Yes, I know it's been a long time, but been busy with other podcasts, and it's still something that I just don't feel comfortable doing on my own. So it's always nice when a new Stephen King book or project comes out that I'm able to rope in my buddies over at JKL Media to come in and talk about Stephen King. And we're going to be talking about his latest book, Never Flinch. So with me today, I have the J and JKL. That would be Jesse. Hello, Jesse.
Hello, Lou.
And of course, the K is Karen. Hello, Karen.
Hello.
And we're talking about Stephen King's 65th novel, Never Flinch. It's the
Wow.
seventh appearance of Holly. So Holly's become the alter ego of Stephen King, I guess you could say. And I'm very curious to hear both your thoughts about this book. I have my thoughts, of course, and we'll get into all of that. But Karen, let's start with you. What did you think of Never Flinch?
I always love Holly. I think she was great, and this was not my favorite Holly book, though. And I'll tell you why once we get into things. But
Okay.
I read it in one sitting,
Wow.
as I do most books, to be honest.
Okay.
3.5 hours, by the way. I
Hmm.
watched the thing at the bottom.
Nice.
And there were some really gripping parts of it. And yeah, I liked it.
Okay. Jesse.
Yeah, I really like this. I think last book I liked a little bit better, but by just decimal points. What I find interesting is that these books tend to be less horror and supernatural and more just really mysteries
Yeah.
with just a little bit of an ick, like a little bit of a twist factor. And I
Hmm.
think that's fun that he has found a character that works for that. I don't think anyone would have had in when The Stand and everything was coming out that, oh, Steven's going to do a series of mystery novels with a heroine or that his version of a detective.
Yeah.
And I think it's been great.
Yeah, I think King has always been a big fan of crime fiction, and in his twilight years, I guess you could say he's been focused more on that type of fiction as opposed to his earlier stuff. And I know in the fandom, it's a bit of an irritant for some people. They're tired of Holly. They want the next It or whatever from Stephen King. I don't know if we're ever going to get that anymore, though he is, and I believe he has just completed finishing the Talisman 3. So that's great. He's finished off that trilogy. That's really the only unfinished work that he had. Unfortunately, of course, Peter Straub is not around anymore, so he had to write it solo, but he said he did base it on a great idea that Peter had. So I'm sure that that will be something to look forward to. And I'm glad that he's finishing off that trilogy because that's the only really unopened work that he has. Though I sure would love to see a follow-up to Salem's Lot with the writer and Mark Petrie and what they did after Salem's Lot. As to Never Flinch, this is, I think we're all in sabbatical here. I preferred Holly to this just because I thought the villains were more interesting, the concept, and it was more focused on really the main characters, whereas this book has a lot of moving parts and you're constantly jumping back and forth, so a lot of the momentum dies. Though I do have to say that once he gets into the chapters where he starts using timestamps, like the last night, the pace of the book is relentless, and that's where I couldn't stop reading it. I just had to say, okay, I got to find out what's going on. From that perspective, I thought the book worked pretty good, but overall, and we'll get into it a bit more. I have other reasons as to why this one just didn't hit the same heights as it did for me with Holly. So I don't know how good your memory is on previous Stephen King novels, but my biggest issue with this book, or it's not an issue, but note, our item of note is that this feels like a lot of a recycling of Insomnia, which
Mhm.
had a similar storyline about a pro-abortion speaker coming into town and that somebody was going to try to assassinate her or take out the whole crowd as well. And so this story has much of the same flavor of this pro-feminist character that Holly ends up becoming a bodyguard for, which in a way is a stretch, even though I think King goes out of his way to rationalize the choice that is made to make her the bodyguard, but still it's really It's the big hand wave of the book for me. I don't know how, Jesse, how you felt about that.
So I was you buy the you buy the premise, you buy the bit, right?
Yeah,
So I thought he did a good enough hand wave that you're like, okay, at least he's not ignoring the fact that why she's being Spencer or Matt Scudder. And at least in her acknowledging that she's uncomfortable doing this. So it was, I've not read Insomnia. That way,
that's another
yeah.
doorstop.
Mm.
So it is, so I did not have that. What I found interesting is the weave. Our current president loves talking about the weave, how he can go from all these different subjects and then stick the landing, which I personally don't think he can. This, there was, where are these storylines going? And I thought it was interesting how he ended up weaving it together.
Karen.
Yeah, I do think that he shows enough of Holly wondering whether she can be a bodyguard that it allows you to buy into it. But how she was called in the first place was my question mark. Why Kate McKay would be like, oh yeah, let's get her. And it was a big coincidence thing. I'm not a huge fan of oh, let's put her in so that it dovetails everything together. It could have just been, hey, let's hire her to find out what's going on. She didn't have to be a bodyguard. For me, it was like, whatever. If you want to get it done quicker, that's great. It wasn't
Yeah.
as big of an issue for me as it could have been, but why would they call her to be a bodyguard was my big question mark there, at least.
Yeah. And he tried to sell that by having that overzealous off-duty police officer attacking that person when they thought
Ham.
they had a gun.
Oh,
Uh,
the other guy.
yes, yes. So I think the interesting thing about this, like, I still think the book shows King's strengths with characters, but I do feel that, and King talked about it, this is the first book he had to plot in a while because he's normally a discovery writer. And it felt at times like things were being manipulated to fit the plot. Though I do think that the two villains in the story, I do like how their stories came together. But the thing that King does a lot of times that I think lets fans down a bit is the way he dispatches his big bads is always underwhelming, Karen. And I felt the same thing in this one. I was expecting more of a confrontation between the two villains, but we didn't really get that. The one that was on the jury good duty guy, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. He
Trig.
Trig, yes, Trig. He quickly overpowers the other character, Riss.
Yeah,
And so that I found that a little underwhelming. How did you feel about that?
agreed. It was like, hey, let's put this guy in who's really threatening, make him a trans, and then make him, in the end, weak, and then just get rid of him. That was since we're on this subject real quick, this was my main issue with the book. I immediately cottoned on to the fact that Chris and Chrissy were the same person. I don't know if you did or not, but I definitely did. That was not a question in my mind at
Yeah,
all.
and I don't think King was trying to hide that either.
Okay. It looked like he was setting it up that they were traveling together. But to me, I was like, okay, yeah, there's two suitcases. I get it. He's his sister. His sister's dead. I get it. I think I don't want to get on my soapbox here, but
Please.
the way that he wrote this trans character is not ideal. I'll put
Okay.
it that way.
In what way?
This is a person who was quote unquote made trans by his circumstances. And I think it would have made things much stronger to have a woman actually be the person after Kate McKay.
Okay,
Personally, because
interesting.
that would have made that storyline even hit home a little bit more. Because in this case, it looked like it was a woman, but it
Hmm.
was really a guy. So let's blame the guy for it.
Mm-hmm.
Misogyny thing.
Interesting. I wonder why King chose a man instead of a woman.
That
That
was
is
my whole
interesting.
question. Why
Yeah.
couldn't it have been a female? Because then we'd see two sides of the same coin in Chrissy and Kate. I honestly think it was too convoluted. And yeah, I get what he was going for. I think the trans thing failed, and I think making him a man was a huge mistake. He could have made a very strong woman there that you do have a little sympathy for,
Mm-hmm.
but ultimately they're doing a horrible thing. Yeah. And the way that Chrissy was killed was just like, okay, whatever. The dude is gonna snap her neck and then shoot the person. It was just, and I'm hedging on the pronouns here because I'm not sure how that person identified. I think he was Chris for the most part, but I don't know. But even that, it should have been a well-defined trans character if it was going to be a trans character.
Okay.
Okay, that's my big nit with the book.
Oh, interesting. I never really thought of that, but you make a great point there. Jesse, how about you? What did you think about how the two villains came together?
I did not know immediately that they were the same person, but
Okay.
fairly quickly,
Yeah.
in my mind, I went, oh, wait a minute, is this what he's trying to do? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The, yeah, I was a little disappointed. I agree that if we were going to have this villainy, this two people meet, it ended very quickly. Heaven forbid I rewrite Stephen King, but I thought the church and them manipulating this person who was, I will say, in my mind, and I want to be careful here, mentally ill,
Oh
that
yeah.
thought that because of his sister's death, feeling like he had to be that for his mother, and that the kind of dual personality, the church manipulating that,
Mm-hmm.
even though this would be something that they would be disdained of, was a true villain. The church was the true villain of this, even though there were some horrible things done by Chris and Christy. So, yeah, I was a little surprised how quickly, okay, I'm just going to get rid of this so we can go on to the main bad guy to going to go through this. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to say, though, on the flip side of our criticism of the meeting of the two villains, I do think, and Karen's very valid point about maybe the character should have been female instead of male, is that I do think their origin stories were well done. I do
Oh
think
yeah.
that, like Trigg's whole thing with his dad abusing him, I think that worked well. And I do think like the trauma of Chris losing his sister,
His
Yeah.
twin.
his twins, was
Yeah.
also well done. The King's strength of creating characters that you can empathize with or identify with, even if you don't agree with them, I still think is on full force in this book. Even Kate McKay, who was not a very, to me, sympathetic character, but you still get the sense of what she's all about, mostly through the eyes of her assistant. But still, I do think like all the characters that are in this book are well done. And actually, I think my favorite character was, who's been a minor character up to this point, it was the police detective, Izzy James, who's
Mm.
the baseball pitcher for the cops. Uh,
Yes.
I thought that she was a standout character, even though she doesn't play a large part in the story. But and I would be interested to see her and Holly team up on
Mm.
another story going forward. After what happened to her, to Izzy in this story, I wouldn't be surprised if she desires to leave the force because of the nonsense that went on between the cops and the firemen. But yeah, so I'll just leave that, Jesse. I'll leave that as an open question to you. Which character did you find the most interesting? Not forgetting Jerome and Barbara, who I like them as characters, but I think there's a little bit of too much of wish fulfillment, making one a writer and the other a poet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, I obviously my one of my other podcasts are music obsessed, so
Mm.
I want to read the novel where,
Sister Bessie.
yeah, Sister Bessie and a tour with Barbara learning how to be a backup singer and doing that. I would love that novel. I almost think that the you could have done without the stalker storyline and just focus on the idea that this person of the jury, which I was not trying to figure out who was wrong, who this person was, and so I liked the reveal. I liked that. I think that alone was a pretty good storyline.
Yeah.
That why do you want to kill innocent people? And the Lawrence Block is one of my favorite writers, and in the Matthew Scudder books, once he discovers that Matt Scudder is an alcoholic, the series becomes even better. Before that, they were tend to be just pretty standard mystery novels. But once he discerned, and I see that once in a live chat, Lawrence Block said, "Yeah, surprised the hell out of me that he was an alcoholic. I thought he was fine." And so since then, the books have dealt with alcoholism and AA and the steps and all this makes for a very interesting storyline. So having this person dealing with their addiction and going from one addiction to another, instead of drinking, I'm killing, which is effed up.
Yeah.
You'll often say, "Did you take a drink?" No matter what else, did you not? If you didn't take a drink, it was a good day. I thought it was a pretty interesting storyline. I
Yeah.
really that part of the novel.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the stalker storyline could have been dropped and the book would have been better for it. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And I have no problems with politics in a book. Yeah,
Yeah.
and and I certainly the and I think you also, if he wanted to do a cynical political satire book of this person who is manipulating crowds and everything to serve her purpose, would be another interesting novel, because they could often just, there's a lot of different politics involved with that, pardon the
Yeah.
pun, of
Yep.
manipulating things versus a purity of trying to do certain things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like it would be very interesting to follow McKay after
Yeah,
the events of this book.
yeah,
What does she do with this incident that could create a lot? She could leverage off of it quite well
yeah,
or badly, depending on what
yeah,
she's doing. Yeah, that would be an interesting storyline to follow as well.
Plus
Karen.
have PTSD. She could have a PTSD
Yeah.
yeah.
reaction behind the scenes too.
Yeah. Yeah. Who was your favorite character in the
Okay, I loved Izzy.
Hmm.
I think she was my favorite character in the book, and that's saying something since it was a Holly-based book.
Yeah. And
But
Izzy's not a character that I really liked in the other stories.
yeah, but she was great in this.
Yeah.
And also, and I am trying to remember his name, but the bartender,
Oh, yeah. I don't know off the top of my.
John or
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't remember.
Did you get a little feeling maybe that he had a little crush on Holly?
oh yeah, big time. At the very least, he thinks she's super smart
Yeah,
and likes being around her.
yeah.
God, I cannot remember his name to save my life.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it while you're talking.
Okay, so I liked him a lot because number one, just setting him as a bartender who's also an addict makes him into a super strong character.
Yes.
And also, he did a lot of really interesting things in this book. He was helping Holly when he could. He also held true to the AA beliefs that it is anonymous.
Yeah.
And so nothing in a meeting ever gets revealed. But if he happens to come along something outside of AA, then he can report that. And I also loved how Jerome and he hooked up in the end to help Bessie and how they ended up being there for the end. King really does a great job of weaving things together. And at the very least, even I agree with you 100% that these should have been two separate stories. At the very least, he puts them together nicely in the end. And I think Bessie could have been a better character. I liked her a lot, but I think that she was wasted in this a little bit. She petered out when she was trying to get to Barbara, and she she seemed to love things big, but she wasn't written big,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Does that make sense at
Yeah,
all?
bartender John Adderley.
Thank you. I thought it was John
Ackerley, sorry.
Ackerley.
It took me a
Okay.
long time to find
Did
it.
it? Yeah. I liked him a lot, though. I think he was great. I wish that some of the characters were used better. But I think those two, Izzy and John, were used really well in this book.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I would love another book. I know that some people are like, okay, get away from Holly, but I would love Izzy and Holly to have not, I don't know if we want Izzy to join her, retire from the police department, but I would love another mystery with them working together. I thought that
Like a
was
buddy
interesting.
cop
Yeah,
story.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
would be great.
because she would Izzy's the muscle and Holly's the brain, so
Yeah.
Yep,
it would be a good pairing, and I would love it for the next if they do that because I would love to see Izzy become part of Finders Keepers.
Yeah.
I would love to see a supernatural element to the story as well because I'd like
sure.
to see Izzy confront that because
I
Holly's
think,
had experience with it,
yes.
but Izzy hasn't, and I think that would be pretty awesome. And yeah, and I would like to keep the scope narrow. Just focus really on those two characters. I don't
Mm.
even really need Jerome and Barbara
No.
in the story at all. I got nothing against the characters, but I think they're personally, I think they're played out
Yeah.
and they're off doing their own things now. King's keeping them around for sentimental reasons at this point, I think. But yeah, I don't want to come off as being too down on the book because it still was an enjoyable read.
Yeah,
Not as easy to get through, say, Holly, which was had a much better focus because there was only one set of villains. The things that still keep me coming back to King are his ability to create interesting characters, and that's on display here again, like Karen mentioned with the bartender. Fleshing out Izzy, McKay, and her assistant were fairly interesting. Trig was interesting. I was iffy
mm,
on that one, but yeah, overall, I'm being selfish because, and I think a lot of King readers are. The feeling is that like King's 77,
Mm.
78. How many books does he have left in him? And we want that one more iconic horror novel. And I don't know if we're going to get it at this stage. Maybe the third Talisman book will scratch that itch to a certain degree for a lot of us. But I like Holly, and I think her arc through the 7 books that she's been has been interesting to see her where she is now. And I find her relatable because I think a lot of us have insecurities of that. And she's she's got some really good skill sets in certain areas, but then another one she's really clueless still. And she's got those foibles. Like she knows that smoking is bad for you, but she can't quite kick the habit totally. So yeah, I do like her. I just think that if King would put her back into a horror story, that would work quite well.
And one of the things I also felt in this book, Holly was not as, it did not feel like she had as much inner turmoil as like she did with the actual Holly book
Yeah,
or in the past where she was whether she was fighting smoking or the her obsessions
yeah.
of
Shaking
cleaning her
hands.
hands, yeah,
Yeah,
doing this
yeah,
like
elbow
she
pump.
has just that she is slightly on the spectrum.
Yeah,
This did not seem as much this time, and maybe that isn't the part of the story he wanted to tell.
yeah.
I am not as a major fan of Stephen King as you guys are, though certainly have read my books. So to me, Fairy Tale is one
mm.
of his last great, yeah, Springsteen putting out a new album going, yeah, I still got my fastball. I can still do this. And so I think that is, if that's his last great horror slash fantasy, that's not a bad legacy.
That's
Thoughts?
interesting. I think Fairy Tale's okay. I actually think his last strong novel was probably later, which is a crime horror thriller. It's mine's the Sixth Sense vein, but I think that's a pretty good book. I'm hoping that Talisman 3 will actually turn out to be his next great novel, but we'll have to see because the horror elements are there and it ties into the Dark Tower series as well to a certain degree. That will be interesting to see. But Yeah, King, I think King's at that stage in his career where he's done every horror trope that you can think of. He's done vampires, he's done
Yeah.
zombies, he's done monsters, he's done shapeshifters. Like, there's not too much left for him to mine in the horror genre, which is why I think he's been branching out into the crime thriller genre in his later years. And again, we'll just have to see how Talisman 3 works out. And I don't know what he's working on beyond that, but I would like to think that it'll be something original and not another Holly story, but we'll have to see.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a feeling that he's not going to do another Holly story. I would hate that because I love Holly as a character.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
she needs a good ending.
yeah, I
Like
agree.
I could see that.
she's still hanging. Jesse and Karen, I think you guys read more long-running series than I do, but especially like Jesse, you've mentioned with Lawrence Block and
Yeah.
the Spencer things. Like, do the characters get a good send-off or?
So the Matthew Scudder books, yes, the last book he did was a really good send off. And then he did a collection of a short story kind of talking about where
Mhm.
they wrapped up some of the things. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think one of the joys I had 4 or 5 years ago is I read all of those Scudder books in a row. I just read them all.
All right.
And yeah, he wraps things up. One of the nice things is Matthew ages in the books, and
Mm,
there's a scene where they talk about getting old and losing this. And yeah, I think the cash cow is you don't age your characters and
Right.
you keep it going so that you can just keep doing that. But in this case, I like that Holly has changed. And yeah, I would like to see her get an ending,
Yeah.
you know.
Aaron?
yeah, I'm thinking of the series that I've read, and most of them they're not, they're more like each one is a standalone. I read a series based on a rock band, and each book focuses on one member of the rock band. And then in order to make more books, it's, hey, their opening act. They have stuff and they are worked in like a French braid almost, worked in throughout those first few books. And
Mhm.
then their part gets bigger and bigger until you get to their book. And by then you're interested in what's going on in their lives. And so the books that I've read are like that. And each book, the person gets a decent enough ending. You're not really wondering about where their life is going, but they
All
do
right.
appear in the other books, if that makes sense.
I'm gonna throw this question back to both of you. I'll start with you, Karen. Have you ever read a series where at the end the main character is killed off?
Oh, yeah,
Were you okay with
sure.
that?
If it works, yes.
Okay. Okay.
You really have to have a good book, though.
Mhm.
All right. All right. Jesse?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm sure I have. One doesn't come to mind immediately,
Okay.
but yeah, I'm sure I have, but one doesn't stand out immediately.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and I don't know if King will do it because he's really pulled back from dropping the hammer on characters lately. But I think a good ending for Holly would be for her to mirror
Mm,
Bill's story arc and that for her to do something or intervene in something that ends up with her dying. Like maybe it would be saving Izzy or something like that. I don't know, but
sure.
I think that would be a good arc for her, and he could even get kind of corny and have Bill come back to her as a ghost kind of
Mm,
thing and help her cross over to the other side. I'm just spitballing here, but I know a lot of
Yeah,
people are probably rolling their eyes at that, but I think that would be actually pretty cool.
I love
Yes.
yeah,
that.
So we'll have to see what he does with that character. I do think she deserves some closure because right now she's hanging again. And whether that's because King wants to write more stories about her or I don't know. But I think that one more Holly story with closure would be good for him and for the fan base. But we'll have to see what he does with that.
One of the books that I think of when you say, has someone died, is a series that I read by an author that I was reviewing books with her. And so I hate to say I knew her, but I had spoken with her lots.
Mhm.
And I actually wrote her an email when I was done with that book. And I said, I hate you, but it's also amazing. And I cried a lot. And we had to lose that character in order for the good stuff that came afterwards to happen. I do think it can be incredibly effective if it's done right. If it's not done right, then it's just a waste of a character.
Yeah.
But when you said, how do you think, or I'd love to see a book where Holly goes out, my first thought is it would be great if she sacrificed herself
Yeah.
for the greater good, because that's her character, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Sad, but fantastic.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking like for you Farscape fans out there, I'm thinking like Creus from
Yep.
this third season, that the arc that he started with and where he ended up. That was a hell of a good story, character arc.
Agreed.
One of the best ones in a TV series that I can remember off the top of my head. So here we are. We're at the end of Holly. I don't like to go into specifics because I don't want to spoil the story for readers. And I should have probably put a spoiler warning up top. Sorry about that because we did mention certain elements. But yeah, it's Holly's still an interesting character to me. I know she's divisive within the fan base. They'd much rather King write more something new and horror based. But uh, I really think that phase is gone for him. It'll be interesting to see. I think Joe Hill, he's got a big book coming out this year. Can't remember the title of it, something King of Sorrow, I believe it. And it's like another doorstop. I don't know if this version of The Stand or whatever, but I think that's where a lot of King's fans are migrating to, is to Joe Hill. So we'll have to see how that turns out. So with that, I do want to mention a couple other things, but before I do, I'll just get to Jesse and Karen. I'll start with you, Jesse. Your final thoughts on Never Flinch.
So I was really happy to read this new novel from Stephen. As I said, I like this character. I enjoyed how he weaved the two stories together. And so it's hard any new book is always a treat,
Yeah,
especially at this long in his career. You're
exactly.
like, so I am not it while I'm talking about suggestions or thoughts I could do, that does not mean that I am absolutely unhappy with what I got. I'm
Yeah,
just greedy and giving suggestions because if you just said it's a great book, that makes for a very short podcast.
exactly. Exactly. Karen.
Yeah, like I said, I read it in one sitting. It wasn't difficult to get through. There was no part of this that I thought, oh, I don't want to go on. It was
Hmm.
compelling. I do think Trig was an amazingly strong antagonist here.
Yeah,
And it was interesting to watch his descent into madness, as it were.
Yes, very
Uh,
well said.
yeah, and I love Holly. I could read another 5 books about Holly, I think, but I do think that she needs a good ending. And instead of just, hey, this was her last book and dot. I like Jesse said, anytime we get a new Stephen King book, I'm excited to add it to my TBR list. And this one, I couldn't wait to read, but something kept getting in the way of it. And when I finally read it, I'm like, why didn't I read this a week and a half ago? So yeah, I really loved it. I can't believe it took me 3 weeks to read it. It took me one night to read it, but 3 weeks to put it off, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. This is a bit of a tangent, but what you just said there, that you read the book in one night, and I as someone who was always flirting with the idea of writing stuff, I wonder as a writer how they feel like I spent 3 years, 2 years or whatever writing this book and somebody reads it in a night. Like that just doesn't seem,
That's me though.
that just doesn't seem like a fair balance.
I'm an outlier.
Well,
Honest.
Like
so
I'd like to try to treasure these things when
one
they
Yeah,
come out,
I
but it's
know.
hard.
I remember in a introduction, a forward to a Peter David Star Trek novel, and he said that often his audience shares that when they get the new novel, they tear through it incredibly quick. And
Mm.
he says, I'm actually hoping for that this time because this is a complicated story. And if people keep read it in punches, I'm worried they're going to get lost. So I think
Yeah.
it just could depend.
Yeah.
To me, and
Yeah.
again, I am not the typical novel reader.
Yeah.
I read everything quickly. I don't think there's a book that I've paused in the middle of for a very long time. For me, if I can sit down and read a book quickly and still absorb everything, that's a good book.
Yeah.
So that's just my perspective. I don't think an author should be upset if someone reads something a certain way because each reader is different. And as long as you get people saying, "Hey, I like this book," then, you should say at least they like the book. I really do think that. And there are a lot of people that just read one or two books a year, and you wonder how much do they enjoy it if they can put it down for a week and a half and not go back to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did want to tell not about reading, but a story that there was a couple of things that we make the joke that we'll order a sandwich or some kind of drink, and Chris will make the joke that it took them longer for them to make this than it did for me to eat it. That's how
Mhm.
good it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I honestly, not being a writer, I've written some things, but not
Mhm.
being a writer, I wonder how I would feel. And I don't know. I think I'd just be happy if someone enjoyed the book. And I'm not saying
Yes.
that's how everyone should be.
And I think that's the position probably most writers come down on. It says whatever best way the person can and how they consume the book and enjoy it, that's fine, just as long as they enjoy the book. It's just kind of personal preference. I like some people like to gulp their drinks depending on what they're drinking.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Others people like to sip it and savor the taste and enjoy it and sit back. That's why I like scotch because you take a sip, it's pretty powerful, but you let it go down your gullet and you just enjoy the after effects, like the little warm glow that you get.
Mhm.
But then you have other guys that just want to guzzle a beer. So it's like that. My final thoughts on Holly are Never Flinch is because of my familiarity with other stories, especially Insomnia. I found this one a little less didn't grab me because we've already covered this type of dynamics already. But still, his strengths in creating characters, especially the antagonists in the book, I thought Trig was really well done. Chrissy was okay. I really like Karen's idea of making the character female instead of male, though. I think that would have worked out better. And I have to say that once the story does come together, like from chapter 20 on, when he starts doing timestamps for the final day,
Mm.
that those pages just flew by. Like that's where the story really took off for me, and I enjoyed it quite a bit from that perspective. So with that, that's our thoughts on Holly. I want to thank Jesse and Karen for letting me co-opt them for this podcast, the Stephen King podcast, to do this. I hope to have a couple more episodes out. I'd love to have Karen and Jesse on those ones, but I just don't know if they're going to be interested or able to do that because I know The Life of Chuck is out in theaters now, and I want to
Mm,
go see that this
me
week,
too.
and I want to do a review on that. So I don't know if that's something in your ballpark. And then in the mid-July, the TV series based on the King book, The Institute, will start airing. So
Mm.
that was something else that probably won't do like an episode by episode blowback on that one, but I would like to do a review of the series once it's done.
I don't know if I'm going to make it to the theater to see Life is Chuck,
Okay.
but I definitely am in for the series.
Okay, cool. And then later on this year, The End of the World as We Know It is a anthology collection based on the premise of The Stand. It has a whole swath of writers that I'm really looking forward to reading that. And I think that's going to be a highlight of the year, even though King's not personally involved in that project. But there's all the who's of horror writers and thriller writers are going to be in that. So that should be quite the treat as well. And I've been prepped for that. I've been doing audiobook listens on my walk. So I just did Insomnia and I finished The Stand. Man, those two books took me about 4 months of walking to go through.
Yeah.
They're so long. But so that's where we're at with that. So those are my tentative plans for the podcast over the course of the year. And hopefully any King fans out there that still remember this podcast will come and check those episodes out. But that's it for now. Once again, thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Karen. And with that, we'll do our sign-offs. And Jesse, where can people find out about you and what you
Well,
do?
you can hear us talk about all things pop culture on JKL Media. Please check that out if you've liked our conversation. You can hear me talk music on Set Lusting Bruce, where I have people from around the world joining me to talk about not only Bruce Springsteen, but other musicians about the power and the joy of music. Doctor Who, Next Stop Everywhere. We just finished wrapping up the latest season, and now we're back to discussing Classic Who. And last, but certainly not least, Perfectly Good Podcast, where Sylvan Groth and I are going through every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. So that's where you can find me.
And what letter are you on now?
We are still on L. We were
Oh,
talking about L
you're about
has
halfway.
been a long one.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Yeah, I am at Elevaria on the various social media sites. My blog is alliestuff.com. And that's pretty much it. You can email us on the JKL side at jklmediareviews@gmail.com. I'll give you that. I think we're going to cross post this to JKL Media's YouTube page as well. That's it for me.
All right, as Jess and Karen mentioned, you can find us usually on YouTube at JKL Media, where we review one-offs of or limited run series. So we cover books, music, movies, and whatever else catches our fancy. I think our next episode is going to be the Chicago Seven, Jesse.
Yes, I wanted to do a Brian Wilson documentary, but there isn't one available on any of the streaming services. I think I'll keep searching for that and maybe
Well,
I
they're
would do that.
going to. He just passed. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming we'll get something rather
Yeah.
soon.
Okay, very good. And on my YouTube channel, Lou's Reviews, you'll find our archived Babylon 5 entire series and 2023 animated movie reviews. Also, that's the home of my Stephen King podcast, as well as my writer interview podcast that I do as well. And you can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Lou W. Sitzma. And with that, the bar is closed. So until next time, take care, so long, and bye-bye.
Bye.
And scene.